Strip that filthy jacket off right now or I'll personally drag you to the security office myself. The words hung in the morning air like poison, vicious and sharp. Captain Beckett Crowley stood with his arms crossed, his voice carrying across the parade ground where 200 recruits had gathered to witness what would become the most shocking reveal in Fort Blackstone's history. But this story began 3 years earlier in a different desert, under a different flag. Afghanistan, 2014. The sun blazed mercilessly over Forward Operating Base Sentinel as Major Marlo Kincaid adjusted her black tactical uniform, the silent operator insignia gleaming silver against the dark fabric. Her voice cut through the radio static as she coordinated a rescue mission that would save 17 hostages and change the course of the war in that sector. The eagle emblem on her chest caught the light as she moved, commanding absolute respect from every soldier in her unit. Target acquired, moving in now. The scene dissolved like smoke. Present day. Fort Blackstone, Advanced Training Facility, South Carolina. 6:30 a.m. on a Tuesday that would rewrite everything anyone thought they knew about appearances. Marlo Kincaid walked through the main gates wearing a faded olive jacket that had seen better decades, her boots worn but polished, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. The jacket hung loose around her shoulders, zipped high to her throat, concealing everything underneath. To the trained eye, there was something deliberate about how she held herself. But to the recruits lounging near the entrance, she looked like someone who had wandered onto the wrong movie set. Cole Harlan spotted her first. 6 feet of pure arrogance wrapped in a crisp new uniform, he had the kind of swagger that came from never being truly tested. His buzz cut gleamed in the early sunlight as he nudged his buddy, a stocky recruit named Finn Morrison, who laughed too loud at everything. "Look what the cat dragged in," Cole muttered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Someone's grandma donate her old camping gear?" Finn snorted, his eyes scanning Marlo's outfit with obvious disgust. "That jacket's older than dirt. What's she trying to hide under that tent?" The comment drew attention from other recruits scattered across the assembly area. A lean girl named Jessica Torres looked up from tying her boots, her expression skeptical. "Maybe she's embarrassed about her body," she said with a cruel smile. "Some people need extra layers to feel confident." Marlo kept walking, her pace steady, but her left hand unconsciously tightened on the jacket's zipper. The gesture was subtle, protective, like someone guarding a secret they weren't ready to share. She found a spot near the back of the formation, away from the growing whispers, but the damage was already spreading. Before we dive deeper into what happened next, this story hits different when you're part of the community. If Marlo's quiet strength is speaking to you already, hit that like button and subscribe. These are the stories that remind us why we never give up. Now, let's see how far they pushed her. Training instructor Taryn Ellis emerged from the administrative building, her clipboard in hand and her expression set in permanent disapproval. She was the kind of woman who had clawed her way up through sheer determination and seemed to resent anyone who might have had an easier path. Her eyes swept the assembled recruits and landed on Marlo with immediate suspicion. "Kincaid, right?" Taryn's voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Step forward." Marlo moved with fluid precision, her boots making no sound on the asphalt. She stopped at attention, but her hands remained protective over her jacket's closure. "Explain the non-regulation outerwear," Taryn demanded, circling Marlo like a predator. "This isn't a fashion show. We have standards here." "Yes, ma'am. The jacket meets basic requirements for—" "I decide what meets requirements," Taryn cut her off. "You look like you raided a thrift store. That thing's so old it probably has historical significance." Laughter rippled through the formation. Cole stepped closer, emboldened by the instructor's hostility. "Maybe she's got gang tattoos underneath," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's why she's all covered up like a nun." "Or prison scars," added Finn, his voice nasty with implications. "Bet she's hiding some real ugly stuff under there." Marlo's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she didn't respond. Her breathing remained steady, controlled, like someone who had learned to endure far worse than playground taunts. But her grip on the jacket never loosened. Taryn made a note on her clipboard, her pen scratching aggressively. "We'll see how long that mysterious jacket lasts in the South Carolina heat. First exercise is a 5-mile run through the obstacle course. Full gear." The formation broke apart as recruits headed toward the equipment shed. Marlo started to follow, but Cole deliberately stepped into her path, forcing her to stop short. "What's really under there?" he asked, his voice low and threatening. "You some kind of freak? Got surgical scars from changing gender or something? Move aside, please, Marlowe said quietly, her tone level but carrying an undertone that would have warned off anyone with combat experience. Cole didn't move. If anything, he leaned closer, his bulk intimidating. I'm talking to you, weird girl. What's the big secret? Instead of backing down or pushing past him, Marlowe did something unexpected. She shifted her weight slightly, adjusted her stance by mere inches, and suddenly Cole found himself off balance, stumbling backward without understanding how it had happened. She hadn't touched him, hadn't made any aggressive move, but somehow his own momentum had worked against him. "Excuse me," she said politely, walking past him while he was still recovering his footing. Finn's eyes narrowed as he watched the exchange. "Did you see that?" She moved like she knew exactly what she was doing. "Lucky guess," Cole muttered, but his confidence had taken a hit. There was something about the way she'd handled the situation that didn't match her submissive appearance. The obstacle course stretched across 3 acres of deliberately punishing terrain. Rope climbs, mud crawls, wall scaling, and a final sprint that left most recruits gasping. The morning temperature was already climbing toward 90 degrees, with humidity that made breathing feel like drowning in slow motion. Recruits began shedding excess clothing immediately. Jackets came off, sleeves got rolled up, and everyone tried to find ways to stay cool. Everyone except Marlowe, who stood at the starting line with her jacket still zipped to her throat. "You've got to be kidding me," Jessica Torres said, jogging in place near the starting marker. "She's going to run in that thing? In this heat?" Taryn appeared with a stopwatch, her expression hopeful that she was about to witness a spectacular failure. "Final warning, Kincaid. Remove excess clothing or accept full responsibility for heat exhaustion." Marlowe's response was calm but final. "I'll manage, ma'am." "Your funeral," Taryn shrugged. "Don't expect us to carry you off the course when you collapse." The air horn blasted, and 30 recruits took off like they were fleeing a fire. Cole shot to the front immediately, his longer stride eating up ground. Others bunched behind him, their breathing already labored from the combination of heat and adrenaline. Marlowe settled into the middle of the pack, her pace deceptively casual. While others pumped their arms and fought for position, she moved with the efficiency of someone who understood that endurance mattered more than early speed. Her jacket remained perfectly positioned, not a wrinkle out of place despite the physical demands. By the first mile marker, sweat was pouring off every other recruit. Cole's face had turned an alarming shade of red, and several people were already struggling. But Marlowe ran as if the temperature was comfortable, her breathing steady, her form unchanged. The rope climb came at mile 2, a 30-foot vertical challenge that required pure upper body strength. Recruits attacked it with varying degrees of success, some making it look easy, others struggling for every inch. When Marlowe's turn came, she approached the rope with the same unhurried confidence she'd shown throughout the run. Her hands found their grip, and she began to climb. What happened next made several observers blink in surprise. She moved up the rope like gravity didn't apply to her. No wasted motion, no struggling, no pause to rest. Hand over hand in perfect rhythm, her jacket never shifting or binding, her breathing still controlled. She reached the top, rang the bell, and descended with the same fluid grace. Finn Morrison, still huffing from his own climb, stared at her with growing confusion. "How is she not dying in that jacket? I'm about to pass out and I'm half dressed." The wall scaling obstacle came next, a 12-foot vertical barrier that had already claimed several casualties. Recruits were helping each other up, forming human ladders and offering shoulders to boost their struggling teammates. Marlowe approached alone. Without asking for assistance or seeming to study the problem, she took 3 running steps and launched herself at the wall. Her hands found purchase on the top edge, her body swung up with controlled momentum, and she was over before anyone realized what they'd witnessed. "Did she just parkour that wall?" Jessica whispered to nobody in particular. The mud crawl was the course's cruelest feature. 50 yards of thick, clinging muck beneath barbed wire that forced everyone to belly crawl through conditions that would make a pig uncomfortable. Most recruits emerged looking like they'd been dipped in chocolate, their clothing destroyed, their dignity in tatters. Marlowe went through the obstacle with the same methodical precision she'd shown everywhere else. But something remarkable happened in the mud. While everyone else thrashed and struggled, she moved through it like she'd done this exact thing 1,000 times before. Her jacket, which should have been a liability, somehow stayed relatively clean. She emerged on the other side while others were still halfway through. Cole, now in 5th place and dropping, watched her with growing anger and bewilderment. "There's no way she's just some random recruit," he panted to Finn, Nobody moves like that without serious training. The final sprint pushed everyone to their absolute limit. A half-mile straight away under the blazing sun, with no shade and no mercy. This was where mental toughness mattered more than physical ability, where the course separated the truly dedicated from those who were just playing soldier. Marlowe had been running in the middle of the pack for the entire course, never pushing to the front, never falling behind. But as they entered that final stretch, something shifted. Her pace increased slightly, almost imperceptibly, but the gap between her and the leaders began to close. She passed the struggling stragglers first, moving by them with the same smooth efficiency she'd shown all morning. Then she caught the middle runners, her jacket still perfectly in place despite nearly 5 miles of brutal obstacles. With 200 yards to go, she was in third place. With 100 yards, she was second. Cole, who had started so confidently, was now stumbling with exhaustion, his early pace having cost him everything he had left. Marlowe crossed the finish line in first place, her time clocking in at 32 minutes and 15 seconds. She wasn't even breathing hard. While other recruits collapsed on the ground or bent over gasping, she stood calmly, her jacket still zipped, her composure unchanged. Taryn Ellis stared at her stopwatch like it had personally betrayed her. "There's no way that time is accurate," she muttered, but the equipment didn't lie. Cole finally staggered across the finish line, his earlier arrogance replaced by complete exhaustion and growing resentment. "She's on something," he wheezed to anyone who would listen. "Steroids, stimulants, something. Nobody runs like that in a winter coat." But it wasn't the athletic performance that bothered him most. It was the way she'd done it, with no apparent effort, no visible strain, like the course had been designed for her comfort rather than their suffering. The group trudged back toward the main facility, their initial mockery replaced by confused murmurs. Marlowe walked alone, as she had all morning, but now the isolation felt different, less like exclusion, more like choice. During the lunch break, the recruits gathered in the mess hall to decompress and complain. The morning's events had created a buzzing undercurrent of speculation, with Marlowe as the primary topic of conversation. She sat alone at a corner table, her jacket still firmly in place despite the building's stifling heat. Her meal was simple, eaten efficiently, without the casual socializing that filled the rest of the room. Cole slumped into a nearby chair, his pride still stinging from the morning's humiliation. "I'm telling you, something's not right about her," he said to his gathering audience. "Normal people don't act like that." "Maybe she's military brat," suggested a quiet recruit named David Chen. "Grew up on bases, learned discipline early." "Or maybe she's hiding something big," Jessica added, her eyes fixed on Marlowe's covered form. "That jacket's not just about modesty. She's protecting a secret." The speculation grew more creative and more cruel. Theories ranged from disfiguring scars to illegal modifications to gang affiliations. Each suggestion made Marlowe seem more mysterious and potentially dangerous in their minds. She finished her meal and stood to leave, and Cole made a decision that would escalate everything. He rose quickly, intercepting her path to the exit. "We're all curious about something," he said loudly, ensuring the entire mess hall could hear. "Why don't you just tell us what you're hiding under that jacket? End the suspense." Marlowe paused, her eyes meeting his with steady calm. "I'm not hiding anything from you," she said quietly. "Then prove it," Cole challenged, his voice gaining confidence from the audience. "If it's no big deal, show us what's underneath." The mess hall went quiet, everyone waiting to see how this confrontation would resolve. Marlowe looked around the room, taking in the expectant faces, the hostile stares, the few uncomfortable expressions from recruits who recognized that lines were being crossed. Her hand moved to her jacket's zipper, fingers pausing at the top of the track. For just a moment, it seemed like she might actually comply with the demand. Then her hand fell away, and she stepped around Cole without another word. "That's what I thought," he called after her, his voice triumphant. "She's got something to hide, and we're going to find out what it is." The afternoon brought tactical exercises, and Taryn Ellis decided to turn up the pressure. If morning's physical challenges hadn't broken Marlowe's mysterious composure, perhaps mental stress would succeed where brute force had failed. "Map reading and navigation," Taryn announced to the assembled group. "You'll be given topographical charts of unfamiliar terrain and asked to plot optimal routes under time pressure. This separates the thinking soldiers from the cannon fodder." She handed out identical maps, dense with elevation markers, natural obstacles, and tactical considerations. The exercise was designed to take most recruits at least 20 minutes of careful study and planning. Marlowe received her map and immediately began studying it, her eyes moving across the terrain with practiced efficiency. What nobody else noticed was the speed of her analysis, the way she absorbed information and processed possibilities faster than should have been possible for someone with basic training. "You have 15 minutes, Taryn announced. "Begin marking your routes now." While other recruits bent over their maps with furrowed brows and obvious concentration, Marlowe's pencil began moving almost immediately. Her marks were precise, confident, like someone who had done this type of analysis countless times before. Finn Morrison, sitting close enough to glimpse her work, couldn't believe what he was seeing. "She's drawing routes faster than I can read the elevation numbers," he whispered to Cole. 5 minutes into the exercise, Marlowe set down her pencil and folded her hands. Her map was completely marked, with primary and alternate routes clearly indicated, including notations about potential hazards and rally points. Taryn noticed the early completion and approached with obvious skepticism. "Finished already? You sure you want to submit work that looks like guesswork?" "I'm confident in my analysis, ma'am," Marlowe replied evenly. Taryn examined the map, her expression shifting from dismissive to puzzled to genuinely impressed. The route selections were not just competent, they were masterful. Every choice demonstrated advanced understanding of tactical movement, terrain analysis, and strategic thinking. "Where did you learn navigation like this?" Taryn asked, her hostility temporarily replaced by professional curiosity. "Basic training covered map reading," Marlowe answered, which was technically true but completely inadequate to explain the level of expertise on display. The other recruits finished their work over the remaining 10 minutes, most of them struggling to complete even basic route planning. When Taryn compared the submissions, Marlowe's work stood out like a graduate thesis among elementary school projects. Cole's map showed adequate but unimaginative route selection. Jessica had made several potentially dangerous terrain judgments. Most others had produced work that would get soldiers lost or killed in actual field conditions. But Marlowe's analysis was flawless. More than flawless, it was innovative, showing alternate approaches that even experienced officers might not consider. "This is graduate-level tactical planning," Taryn muttered, studying the map more closely. "Where exactly did you serve before coming here?" "I haven't served anywhere, ma'am. This is my first assignment." The answer was technically accurate but felt incomplete. Taryn's suspicion, briefly replaced by admiration, came flooding back stronger than before. The day's final exercise was weapons familiarization, conducted at the facility's indoor range. Each recruit was issued a standard service rifle and given basic instruction on safe handling, aiming, and firing procedures. Most military training assumes that recruits arrive with little or no firearms experience. The instruction is methodical, repetitive, designed to build competence slowly and safely. Marlowe listened to the safety briefing with apparent attention, asked no questions, and waited her turn at the firing line with the same quiet patience she'd shown all day. When her name was called, she approached the firing position with smooth, economical movements. She accepted the rifle from the range instructor, checked the action with quick, professional motions, and settled into a shooting stance that looked like it had been carved from stone. The targets were set at 50 yards, with scoring rings that challenged even experienced marksmen. Most recruits were hoping to hit the target at all, let alone achieve any meaningful accuracy. Marlowe's first shot went exactly where she intended it to go. Center mass, perfect placement. Her second shot landed so close to the first that they almost overlapped. By her fifth shot, she had created a grouping that would have impressed competitive marksmen. The range fell silent except for the sound of her controlled breathing and the precise crack of each shot. Other recruits stopped their own shooting to watch, mesmerized by the display of skill they were witnessing. When she finished her magazine, the range instructor called for a ceasefire and walked downrange to examine her target. He returned with an expression of complete bewilderment. "Ma'am, have you been shooting competitively?" he asked. "No, sir. First time firing this particular weapon," Marlowe replied, which was again technically true while being fundamentally misleading. Cole, whose own target looked like he'd thrown the bullets at it, stared at her with undisguised hostility. "Nobody shoots like that without serious training," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's lying about something. The tension is building, isn't it? You can feel how they're all starting to realize there's more to Marlowe than meets the eye. What do you think she's really hiding under that jacket? Drop your theories in the comments below, because what happens next is going to shock everyone." The afternoon sun was merciless as the recruits reassembled for their final formation of the day. The morning's mockery had evolved into something more complex, a mixture of suspicion, resentment, and growing unease about who Marlo Kincaid really was. Captain Beckett Crowley emerged from the administrative building with a manila folder in his hands and an expression that promised trouble for someone. He was a career officer who had never seen combat but possessed absolute confidence in his authority and zero tolerance for anything that disrupted his carefully ordered world. His eyes found Marlo immediately, standing at the back of the formation in her omnipresent jacket, and his jaw tightened with obvious displeasure. "Kincaid, front and center," he barked, his voice carrying across the parade ground. Every head turned as Marlo moved forward with the same fluid precision she'd displayed all day. She stopped at perfect attention, her hands at her sides, her expression calm despite the obvious hostility radiating from the captain. Crowley opened the folder and made a show of studying its contents, though it was clear he'd already made up his mind about whatever decision he was announcing. "I've been reviewing your performance today," he said, his voice loud enough to ensure every recruit could hear. "Interesting results. Physical scores that exceed 90% of active duty personnel. Navigation skills that suggest advanced training. Marksmanship that borders on the professional level." He paused, letting the implications sink in with his audience. Remarkable achievements for someone who claims no prior military experience. Some might call them impossible achievements. Marlo remained silent, but her left hand unconsciously moved to her jacket's zipper, that same protective gesture that had appeared whenever she felt threatened or exposed. "Here's what I think happened," Crowley continued, beginning to pace around her like a prosecutor addressing a jury. "I think someone with a military background decided to play games with our training program. Maybe someone with something to prove, or something to hide." The recruits watched in fascination and growing excitement, sensing that they were about to witness something significant. "That jacket has been bothering me all day," Crowley said, stopping directly in front of Marlo. "Nobody wears heavy outerwear in 90-degree weather unless they're concealing something important, something they don't want the rest of us to see." Cole stepped slightly forward, unable to contain his enthusiasm for this confrontation. "I told everyone she was hiding something," he said. "Nobody acts that weird without a reason." Crowley nodded approvingly at the support. "Exactly right, recruit. Which brings us to the central question of the day." He moved closer to Marlo, close enough that his voice dropped to a conversational level, while still carrying to every corner of the formation. "What exactly are you hiding under that jacket, Kincaid? And don't tell me it's just about staying warm, because we both know that's nonsense." The silence stretched taut as everyone waited for Marlo's response. Her breathing remained steady, controlled, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Not fear exactly, but a recognition that this moment had been inevitable from the beginning. "I'm not hiding anything that concerns you, sir," she said quietly. Crowley's face flushed with anger at what he interpreted as insubordination. "Everything concerns me when it happens on my training ground with my recruits. You will explain that jacket, or you will remove it. Those are your only options." Marlo's hand moved to the zipper again, her fingers pausing at the metal tab. Around the formation, recruits leaned forward with anticipation, finally about to learn the secret that had consumed their attention all day. But instead of pulling the zipper down, her hand fell away empty. "I respectfully decline, sir." The words hit Crowley like a physical blow. In 15 years of military service, he had never encountered direct refusal of a reasonable order from a subordinate. "You decline?" His voice rose with incredulous fury. "You don't get to decline orders, recruit. You follow them, or you face the consequences." He gestured broadly to encompass the entire assembled group, making sure his next words reached everyone present. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are witnessing what happens when someone thinks they're above military discipline, when someone believes their personal secrets matter more than unit cohesion and chain of command." Jessica Torres raised her hand tentatively. "Sir, what if she's got like medical scars or something? Maybe it's embarrassing for her." Crowley turned his attention to the recruit with obvious appreciation for the support. "An excellent point, but medical conditions are documented through proper channels. If Kincaid has legitimate medical concerns, they would be noted in her file." He opened the folder again, making a show of examining its contents. No medical exemptions, no special considerations, no documentation of any condition that would justify this behavior. Finn Morrison, emboldened by the captain's obvious approval of questions, spoke up from his position in the second rank. "What if it's not medical? What if it's like gang tattoos or something illegal?" The suggestion sent a visible ripple of excitement through the formation. Here was a theory that explained everything, that justified their growing suspicion and resentment. Crowley nodded gravely, as if the possibility had just occurred to him. Criminal affiliations would certainly explain the secrecy, and the exceptional skills we witnessed today. He focused his attention back on Marlowe, who had remained perfectly still throughout the increasingly hostile speculation. So let's settle this once and for all. Remove the jacket, show us what you're hiding, and we can all move forward with our training, or continue to refuse, and face disciplinary action for insubordination and possible security violations. The ultimatum hung in the air like a sword about to fall. Every person on the parade ground understood that this moment would define not just Marlowe's future, but the entire dynamic of their training program. Marlowe stood perfectly still for what felt like an eternity, her eyes scanning the faces around her. Some showed cruel anticipation, others genuine curiosity. A few displayed uncomfortable recognition that lines were being crossed. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet, but carrying clearly in the hushed atmosphere. "If I remove this jacket, sir, everything changes, for all of us." Crowley smiled with savage satisfaction. "The only thing that changes is we finally learn who you really are." Marlowe's right hand moved slowly to her jacket's zipper, her fingers closing around the metal tab. The motion was deliberate, final, like someone making a decision they could never take back. "Are you absolutely certain you want me to do this, Captain? Once you see what's underneath, there's no going back to how things were 5 minutes ago." "I am ordering you to remove that jacket immediately," Crowley snapped. "No more warnings, no more delays, no more games." The parade ground fell completely silent except for the distant sound of wind through the facility's flags and the barely audible hum of air conditioning units working against the afternoon heat. Marlowe's fingers tightened on the zipper, and she began to pull it downward with slow, measured movements that seemed to take forever while happening far too quickly. The first inch revealed the collar of whatever she wore underneath. Dark fabric, military in appearance, but not immediately identifiable. The second inch showed more of the same, with what appeared to be the beginning of some kind of insignia or marking. By the third inch, several recruits in the front rank were squinting, trying to make out details of what they were seeing. At 4 inches, Sergeant Pierce Ellery, who had been watching from his position near the administrative building, suddenly straightened with an expression of shock and growing recognition. At 5 inches, the dark fabric revealed itself to be part of a uniform that none of the recruits had ever seen before, but which carried an unmistakable aura of authority and expertise. And at 6 inches, when the first clear glimpse of an insignia became visible, Pierce Ellery's face went completely white, and he took an involuntary step forward, because what he was seeing was impossible. What he was seeing couldn't be real. What he was seeing would change everything they thought they knew about the quiet woman who had endured their mockery and suspicion all day. Marlowe paused with the zipper halfway down, her eyes meeting Crowley's with steady calm. "Last chance to change your mind, Captain. Are you absolutely sure you're ready for this?" Crowley's response was immediate and venomous. "Strip that filthy jacket off right now, or I'll personally drag you to the security office myself." The threat echoed across the parade ground, final and irreversible. There would be no backing down now, no face-saving compromise, no graceful exit for anyone involved. Marlowe nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement and perhaps resignation. Her fingers resumed their downward pull on the zipper, revealing inch by inch what she had been protecting all day. And in that moment, with 200 people watching and Captain Crowley's ultimatum hanging in the air like a sword about to fall, the real story was finally about to begin. The zipper continued its inexorable descent, and with each inch revealed, the atmosphere on the parade ground grew more electric. What had started as cruel entertainment was transforming into something none of the spectators understood yet, but all of them could feel. At 8 inches, the dark fabric beneath Marlowe's jacket revealed itself to be a uniform unlike anything the recruits had ever seen. Not the standard olive green of regular forces, not the digital camouflage of modern combat units, but something sleek and purposeful that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Lieutenant Colonel Grayson Lyle chose that exact moment to emerge from the command building. His afternoon briefing concluded, expecting to find his training facility running with its usual disciplined efficiency. Instead, he discovered 200 people frozen in fascination, watching a confrontation that had clearly spiraled beyond anyone's control. His first instinct was irritation. Disruptions were unwelcome in his perfectly ordered world, and whatever was happening here had the distinct feel of a situation that would require paperwork, explanations, and uncomfortable conversations with superior officers. But as he approached the formation, something about the scene made him pause. The quality of silence was wrong, too intense, too focused. This wasn't the usual drama of training conflicts or personality clashes. This felt significant in ways that made his administrative instincts sound alarm bells. "Captain Crowley," he called, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "Status report." Crowley turned with obvious relief, grateful for reinforcement from higher authority. "Sir, we have a security situation. Recruit Kincaid has been concealing her identity and refusing to comply with direct orders regarding potential contraband or gang affiliations." Lyle's eyebrows rose slightly. In 25 years of military service, he had encountered every variety of recruit problem imaginable, but security threats were rare and always serious. "Explain the nature of the threat, Captain." "Exceptional performance levels that suggest undisclosed prior training, sir. Refusal to remove outerwear that clearly conceals identifying marks or symbols. When directly ordered to comply, she claimed that revealing what she's hiding would change everything." The explanation sounded reasonable to Lyle's ears, particularly the part about concealed identifying marks. Gang tattoos, extremist symbols, and other problematic affiliations were genuine concerns in military recruitment. "Very well. Continue with your investigation, Captain. I'll observe to ensure proper procedures are followed." His endorsement sent a visible wave of satisfaction through the watching recruits, particularly those who had spent the day nursing their wounded pride after being outperformed by someone they had dismissed as weak. Cole Harlan's grin was particularly vicious. "Now she's got nowhere to run," he muttered to Finn Morrison. "About time someone called her bluff." Marlowe heard the exchange, and for the first time all day something shifted in her expression. Not fear, not anger, but a kind of weary resignation, like someone who had hoped to avoid an inevitable confrontation but now accepted that the moment had arrived. "Sir," she said, addressing Lyle directly, "I want to be absolutely clear about something before this continues. When I remove this jacket, the situation changes completely. Not just for me, but for everyone here, including you." Lyle's expression hardened at what he interpreted as veiled threats or attempts at intimidation. "Recruit, you are in no position to make warnings or set conditions. You will comply with lawful orders or face the consequences of insubordination." "I understand, sir. I just want everyone to be certain they're prepared for what comes next." "The only thing we need to be prepared for is the truth," Crowley interjected, his patience finally exhausted. "No more delays, no more mysterious warnings. Remove that jacket now." Marlowe's hand returned to the zipper, and she resumed the slow, deliberate motion that had held 200 people in suspense. 9 inches revealed more of the dark uniform beneath, along with the clear outline of some kind of insignia or badge positioned over her left chest. At 10 inches, the insignia became partially visible, though still not clear enough for positive identification. Several recruits leaned forward, trying to make out details of what appeared to be wings, or possibly a bird of some kind. Pierce Ellery, still watching from his position near the administrative building, felt his stomach drop as recognition began to crystallize. The dark uniform, the positioning of the insignia, the overall presentation was triggering memories he had hoped never to encounter again. At 12 inches, the full shape of the insignia emerged, and Pierce's worst fears were confirmed. The symbol was unmistakable once you knew what you were looking for, though most of the observers had never seen anything like it before. A steel eagle with outstretched wings rendered in silver thread against the black fabric. Below the eagle, a sword pointed downward, its blade gleaming with the same metallic thread. And beneath both symbols, barely visible at the current level of exposure, the beginning of text that would explain everything. Pierce's face had gone completely white, and his hands were trembling as the implications crashed over him like a physical force. He knew that insignia. He had seen it exactly once before, during a classified briefing that had required him to sign documents promising 20 years of silence about what he learned. "No," he whispered, his voice lost in the general murmur of the crowd. "That's not possible. They don't exist." But the evidence was right there in front of him, undeniable and terrifying in its implications. At 14 inches, the text beneath the insignia became partially legible. Unit was clearly visible, followed by numbers that made Pierce's blood run cold. At 16 inches, the full legend was revealed, Unit 77 classified. The words meant nothing to most of the observers, but they meant everything to Pierce Ellery, who had spent 3 years providing logistical support for operations he was never allowed to discuss, involving personnel he was never allowed to acknowledge, carrying out missions that officially never happened. He stumbled forward, his legs suddenly unsteady, his voice cracking as he called out across the parade ground. "Stop! Everyone stop right now!" His outburst caught everyone off guard, breaking the hypnotic focus on Marlowe's slowly descending zipper. Heads turned toward him in confusion, and Lyle frowned at the interruption. "Sergeant Ellery, return to your position. Do not interfere with this investigation." But Pierce was beyond caring about protocol or chain of command. What he was witnessing was so far outside normal procedures that regular military courtesy had become irrelevant. "Sir, with respect, you need to stop this immediately. You don't understand what you're seeing." Lyle's frown deepened into genuine anger. "I understand perfectly, Sergeant. Return to your duties before you join Kincaid on disciplinary charges." Pierce looked at Marlowe, who met his gaze with calm understanding. She had known this moment would come eventually, had probably hoped it would be under different circumstances, but she wasn't surprised that recognition had finally arrived. "Show them," Pierce said, his voice barely audible but carrying clearly in the stunned silence. "They've pushed this too far to stop now. Show them everything." Marlowe nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement and perhaps gratitude for his understanding. Her hand gripped the zipper with renewed purpose, and she pulled it all the way down in one smooth motion. The jacket fell open completely, revealing the full uniform beneath. Black fabric that seemed to drink light, with the eagle and sword insignia displayed prominently over her left chest. But it was the additional elements that made the sight genuinely shocking to anyone who understood their significance. Ribbons and badges covered her right chest, each one representing operations and achievements that most soldiers could only dream of. Service stripes indicated years of active duty that didn't match her apparent age. And most significantly, the rank insignia on her collar showed not the absence of rank expected from a recruit, but the gold oak leaves of a major in the United States Army. The revelation hit like a physical blow to everyone present. This wasn't some mysterious recruit with a secret past. This was a field-grade officer, someone who outranked every person on the parade ground except Lieutenant Colonel Lyle himself. Crowley's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror as the implications became clear. He had just spent 20 minutes publicly humiliating someone who was technically his superior officer. "That's impossible," he stammered. "Recruits don't have rank. New soldiers don't wear ribbons. This is some kind of fake uniform, some kind of stolen valor situation." But even as he spoke, his conviction was crumbling. The uniform was too perfect, too detailed, too authentic to be counterfeit. Every element was exactly where it should be, displayed with the precision that came only from genuine military experience. Pierce Ellery approached slowly, his eyes fixed on the insignia that had triggered his recognition. When he got close enough to read the fine print beneath the Unit 77 designation, his knees nearly buckled. "Silent Operator Division," he read aloud, his voice filled with awe and terror in equal measure. "Strategic reconnaissance and direct action." The words meant nothing to most of the listeners, but they clearly meant everything to Pierce and were beginning to register with Lieutenant Colonel Lyle, whose expression was shifting from anger to confusion to something approaching panic. "Sergeant, what exactly are you saying?" Lyle demanded, but his voice had lost its earlier authority. He was beginning to suspect that this situation was far beyond his understanding or control. Pierce stood at attention, his years of training overriding his shock and fear. "Sir, if that insignia is genuine, then this woman is not a recruit. She's a member of the most classified unit in the United States military. They're ghosts, sir. Officially, they don't exist." The parade ground erupted in whispers and confused conversations as recruits tried to process what they were hearing. Gang tattoos and stolen valor were problems they could understand. Military units that officially didn't exist were beyond their comprehension. Marlowe stood perfectly still throughout the growing chaos, her jacket now hanging open, her true identity finally revealed after a day of careful concealment. But instead of relief or vindication, her expression showed only professional calm, like someone who had completed an unpleasant but necessary task. "Major Marlowe Kincaid," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly despite its low volume. "Silent Operator Division, United States Army Special Operations Command." She reached into an inner pocket of her jacket and withdrew a leather credential case, which she extended toward Lieutenant Colonel Lyle with movements that suddenly carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command. Lyle accepted the credentials with hands that were no longer entirely steady. The documents inside were unlike anything he had ever seen, printed on paper that felt different from standard military identification, with security features and classification markings that made it clear this was several levels above his clearance. But the photograph was definitely Marlowe, and the signature blocks included names he recognized from the highest levels of military leadership. Names that appeared on orders and directives that filtered down from the Pentagon with instructions that brooked no questions or delays. "This is impossible," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. The evidence was too comprehensive, too detailed, too perfectly consistent to be fabricated. Pierce stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Lyle could hear. "Sir, I worked logistics support for classified operations in Afghanistan. I've seen these credentials before. They're real, and they mean she could have any of us court-martialed before breakfast if she wanted." The implication hit Lyle like cold water. Not only was Marlowe a legitimate major, she was a major attached to operations so sensitive that her mere presence suggested oversight or investigation from the very highest levels of command. "Major Kincaid," he said, his tone completely transformed from the hostility of minutes before. "What is your purpose at this facility?" Marlowe accepted her credentials back and returned them to her pocket with the same careful precision she had shown all day. "I'm conducting a comprehensive evaluation of training protocols and facility culture, sir. Pentagon Directive, Eyes Only, issued 6 weeks ago." The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, sending ripples of understanding and horror through everyone present. This hadn't been a random assignment or coincidental placement. Every moment of the day had been observed, evaluated, and documented by someone with the authority to recommend changes that could affect careers and futures. Cole Harlan's face had gone ashen as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. He had spent an entire day harassing and humiliating a field-grade officer who was here specifically to evaluate the training program's treatment of personnel. His military career, which had seemed so promising that morning, was almost certainly over. Taryn Ellis looked like she was going to be physically ill. Her deliberate targeting of Marlowe, her attempts to create failure and embarrassment, had all been witnessed and noted by someone with direct access to the Pentagon's senior leadership. Jessica Torres was quietly crying, understanding that her participation in the day's cruelty would follow her for the rest of her military service, assuming she was allowed to continue at all. "Sir," Marlowe continued, "my preliminary assessment suggests significant cultural problems within this training environment, problems that appear to stem from leadership failures at multiple levels." She gestured broadly to encompass the entire formation, her meaning unmistakable. This wasn't just about individual bad actors, but systemic issues that would require comprehensive reform. Lieutenant Colonel Lyle felt the weight of his own career settling around his shoulders like a shroud. He had not only allowed the harassment to continue, he had actively endorsed it, had used his authority to support what was apparently a massive breach of military discipline and professionalism. "Major, I need to understand the scope of your evaluation. How long have you been observing our operations?" "Today was day 1 of a planned 2-week assessment, sir. I was hoping to observe normal interactions and training protocols without the complications that come from people knowing they're being evaluated." The admission that this was only the beginning sent another wave of fear through the formation. If this was how badly things had gone on the first day, when they were supposedly on their best behavior, what would 2 weeks of scrutiny reveal? "However," Marlowe continued, "today's events have provided more than sufficient data to complete my initial report. The level of harassment, discrimination, and abuse of authority I witnessed exceeds anything I expected to encounter at a facility with Fort Blackstone's reputation." Pierce Ellery, still standing near enough to hear the conversation, found his voice again. "Major, if I may ask, what happens now?" Marlowe turned her attention to him, and for the first time all day, her expression showed something approaching warmth. "You demonstrated professional courtesy and attempted to intervene when the situation escalated beyond acceptable limits, Sergeant. That will be noted in my report." Pierce's relief was visible, but it was overshadowed by his concern for the others who had not shown such restraint. "As for the rest," Marlowe continued, her voice returning to its professional neutrality, "consequences will be determined by appropriate authority levels. Some decisions are beyond my scope to make." She reached into another pocket and withdrew a secure satellite phone, the kind issued only to personnel involved in the most sensitive operations. The sight of the device sent a final confirmation through the formation that everything they had believed about reality had been wrong. "I need to contact my command structure and provide an initial assessment of today's events. Lieutenant Colonel Lyle, I recommend you begin preparing detailed incident reports for everyone who participated in today's harassment." Lyle nodded numbly, understanding that his world was about to change in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. "Yes, ma'am. I'll begin immediately." Marlowe activated the satellite phone and walked a short distance away for privacy, but her voice carried just well enough for the formation to hear fragments of her conversation. "Control, this is Phoenix 7. Evaluation terminated early due to significant cultural violations. Recommend immediate intervention at facility level." "Yes, sir, I have documentation of everything." Cole Harlan sank to his knees as the reality of the situation finally penetrated his shock. He had harassed a major. He had made crude comments about her appearance. He had challenged her authority and questioned her legitimacy. In military terms, his actions bordered on mutiny. "I'm dead," he whispered to no one in particular. "My career is over, my life is over, Finn Morrison, standing nearby, was equally devastated but still trying to process what had happened. How could we know? She looked like just another recruit. How were we supposed to know? The question captured the essential tragedy of the situation. They hadn't known because they hadn't bothered to look beyond surface appearances. They had made assumptions based on nothing more than clothing and demeanor, and those assumptions had destroyed their futures. Marlowe concluded her phone call and returned to the formation, her expression grave but professional. "Gentlemen, ladies, you're about to learn why the military places such emphasis on treating everyone with respect and dignity, regardless of their apparent status or position." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "In approximately 30 minutes, a helicopter will arrive carrying investigators from the Inspector General's office. They will conduct individual interviews with everyone present today, and their findings will determine the consequences for what occurred." The announcement sent a fresh wave of panic through the formation. Inspector General investigations were serious business, capable of ending careers and resulting in court-martial proceedings for serious violations. "However," Marlowe continued, "I want you to understand something important. Today wasn't really about me. It wasn't about my feelings or my comfort or my ability to tolerate harassment." She gestured towards the administrative building where other training cycles were visible through the windows, going about their daily routines in blissful ignorance of the drama unfolding outside. Today was about how you treat people when you think there are no consequences, how you behave when you believe someone is beneath you or different from you, how you respond when you have power over someone you perceive as weak. Her voice gained intensity, though it never rose above conversational volume. "Every day, in every military unit around the world, soldiers just like you are making the same kinds of judgments you made about me, looking at their fellow service members and deciding who deserves respect and who doesn't, who belongs and who's an outsider, who's worth protecting and who's acceptable to sacrifice." The parallel was becoming clear, and several recruits were beginning to understand that this had been more than just a training evaluation. This had been a comprehensive examination of their character, their values, and their fitness to serve alongside others. The people you serve with in combat won't always look like you, or talk like you, or come from the same background as you. They might be quiet when you're loud, careful when you're aggressive, different in ways that make you uncomfortable or suspicious. She paused again, her eyes scanning the faces around her, most of which now showed genuine shame and understanding. "But they'll be the ones watching your back when bullets start flying. They'll be the ones carrying you to safety when you're wounded. They'll be the ones making life and death decisions that determine whether you come home to your families." The lesson was landing with devastating effectiveness. These weren't abstract concepts anymore, but practical realities that would determine their survival and success throughout their military careers. Today, you failed that test. You allowed prejudice and assumptions to override professionalism and basic human decency. You participated in harassment that could have driven someone from service, depriving the military of their skills and contributions. She looked directly at Cole, then at Jessica, then at several others who had been particularly vocal in their mockery. More importantly, you revealed that you're not ready to be trusted with the lives and welfare of your fellow soldiers. You're not prepared for the responsibility of military leadership. The words hit like physical blows, but they were undeniably true. Military service demanded better judgment, stronger character, and more mature decision-making than any of them had demonstrated. The sound of rotor blades in the distance announced the arrival of the helicopter Marlowe had mentioned. The aircraft approached from the south, a military transport that landed with practiced precision on the designated pad adjacent to the parade ground. 4 individuals in military dress uniforms emerged from the aircraft, their bearing and demeanor making it immediately clear that they represented serious authority. The lead figure, a colonel with Inspector General insignia, approached Marlowe with professional courtesy but obvious urgency. "Major Kincaid, we received your preliminary report. Are you prepared to brief us on the situation?" "Yes, sir. I have comprehensive documentation of today's events, including witness statements and photographic evidence." She handed him a tablet device that had appeared from yet another pocket, its screen showing what appeared to be detailed notes and timestamps from throughout the day. The level of harassment exceeded our worst-case scenarios for this evaluation. Recommend immediate intervention and comprehensive retraining for all personnel. The colonel nodded gravely as he reviewed the information. "Understood. We'll begin individual interviews immediately." He turned his attention to Lieutenant Colonel Lyle, whose uniform now showed visible perspiration despite the late afternoon temperature. "Colonel Lyle, you and your staff will be interviewed first, followed by the training personnel involved in today's incidents. This facility is temporarily under direct oversight of the Inspector General pending completion of our investigation." The announcement was the final confirmation that everything had changed permanently. Fort Blackstone was no longer just a training facility with a problem. It was an active investigation site with implications that would ripple through the entire military education system. Over the next 3 hours, the investigators conducted thorough interviews with everyone present, documenting not just the actions taken, but the motivations and thought processes behind them. The process was professional, but relentless, designed to create a comprehensive record that would support whatever disciplinary actions were deemed appropriate. Cole Harlan's interview lasted 45 minutes and ended with him being informed that charges were being prepared for conduct unbecoming, harassment, and insubordination. His military career was officially over, pending the formality of court-martial proceedings. Taryn Ellis fared slightly better, but only because her actions, while inappropriate, had been within the technical bounds of her authority as an instructor. She would face administrative punishment and reassignment, but criminal charges were unlikely. Captain Crowley's situation was the most complex, as his actions had been based on what appeared to be legitimate security concerns. However, his failure to recognize the obvious inconsistencies in Marlowe's story, combined with his aggressive handling of the situation, would result in significant career consequences. Lieutenant Colonel Lyle's fate would be determined at levels far above the investigation team's authority, but the preliminary assessment was not optimistic for his continued command of the facility. As the sun began to set over Fort Blackstone, the formal interviews concluded and the investigators prepared their preliminary findings. The helicopter remained on standby, ready to transport key personnel and evidence back to Washington for further analysis. Marlowe stood alone near the parade ground where the day's events had unfolded, her jacket once again zipped closed, her expression thoughtful as she reviewed everything that had occurred. Pierce Ellery approached cautiously, uncertain of the protocol for interacting with someone whose true identity had been so dramatically revealed. "Major, if I may ask, what happens next? For the facility, I mean." Marlowe turned to face him, her expression showing genuine consideration for his question. "That depends on the final investigation results, Sergeant. But I expect significant changes to training protocols, leadership structure, and facility culture." "And for the people involved?" "Individual consequences will vary based on the severity of their actions and their demonstrated willingness to learn from this experience. Some careers will end, others will continue with appropriate guidance and oversight." Pierce nodded, understanding that justice in this case would be both swift and comprehensive. "Ma'am, can I ask why you chose to reveal yourself the way you did? You could have stopped the harassment at any point by showing your credentials." Marlowe considered the question carefully before answering. "Because stopping the harassment wouldn't have solved the underlying problem, Sergeant. It would have just taught them to be more careful about who they target, not to eliminate the targeting altogether." She gestured toward the administrative building, where lights were beginning to come on as the facility transitioned to evening operations. This way, everyone learns that they can never be certain who they're really dealing with. That quiet person they want to dismiss might be someone with the authority to change their lives. That assumption they want to make about someone's capabilities might be completely wrong. The lesson was profound in its simplicity and devastating in its effectiveness. No one who had been present today would ever again be comfortable making snap judgments about their fellow service members. More importantly, Marlowe continued, they learn that actions have consequences, even when those consequences aren't immediately apparent. Military service demands better judgment and stronger character than what we witness today. A staff car approached from the main gate, its headlights cutting through the gathering darkness. The vehicle carried additional personnel from the Pentagon, senior officers who would take charge of the comprehensive reform process that was about to begin. I need to brief the incoming team, Marlowe said, preparing to conclude their conversation. But Sergeant, I want you to know that your intervention today was noted and appreciated. Leaders who are willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult, are exactly what the military needs. Pierce felt a mixture of relief and pride at the recognition, but also a deep sadness for his colleagues whose careers were ending in disgrace. Thank you, ma'am. I just wish more people had made better choices today. So do I, Sergeant. So do I. The next morning brought official announcements and personnel changes that confirmed everyone's worst fears about the consequences of their actions. Cole Harlan was formally discharged from military service. His dreams of a career in uniform ended by a single day of poor judgment and cruel behavior. Taryn Ellis was reassigned to a remote administrative position with no training responsibilities and no opportunity for advancement. Her expertise as an instructor would be wasted, but the military could no longer trust her judgment with recruits. Captain Crowley was relieved of command and reduced in rank to lieutenant, his career effectively over despite avoiding criminal charges. He would spend his remaining military service in positions where his poor judgment could do minimal damage. Lieutenant Colonel Lyle's fate was still being determined at Pentagon levels, but his removal from command was immediate and permanent. Fort Blackstone would receive new leadership with specific mandates to implement comprehensive cultural reforms. But perhaps the most significant change was the facility's new mission. In addition to its traditional training role, Fort Blackstone would become a testing ground for new approaches to military education, with emphasis on respect, inclusion, and professional development that prepared soldiers for the diverse challenges of modern military service. The reforms were comprehensive and immediate. New protocols required that all personnel, regardless of apparent rank or status, be treated with dignity and professionalism. Training scenarios were redesigned to test character and judgment as rigorously as physical and technical skills. Most importantly, the story of what had happened became required education throughout the military training system. Every new recruit, every officer candidate, every professional development course would include detailed examination of the Fort Blackstone incident and its lessons about assumptions, prejudice, and the importance of treating all service members with respect. Marlowe Kincaid was officially reinstated to her permanent rank of major and assigned to lead the comprehensive reform effort as Director of Training Innovation for the United States Army. Her new role would take her to training facilities across the country, implementing changes designed to prevent the cultural failures that had been so dramatically exposed at Fort Blackstone. 3 months later, she stood before a new class of recruits at the reformed facility, her uniform now properly displayed, her credentials and authority clear to everyone present. But her message remained the same as it had been on that dramatic day when everything changed. Ladies and gentlemen, military service is built on trust. Trust between leaders and subordinates, trust between teammates, trust in the institutions and values that guide our decisions. That trust is earned through consistent demonstration of character, integrity, and respect for others. She paused, looking out over faces that showed attention and respect rather than the mockery and dismissal that had characterized her first day at the facility. You will serve alongside people who are different from you in countless ways. Different backgrounds, different beliefs, different approaches to problems and challenges. Your success and theirs will depend on your ability to see past surface differences to the shared commitment to service that brings us all together. Her voice carried the authority of experience and the weight of lessons learned through painful example. Never assume you know who someone is or what they're capable of based on appearances alone. The person sitting next to you might be your future commanding officer. The quiet recruit in the back might be the one who saves your life in combat. The individual you're tempted to dismiss or exclude might be the key to accomplishing your mission. She walked among the recruits as she spoke, making eye contact with individuals throughout the formation, ensuring that her message reached everyone present. Treat everyone with the respect and professionalism they deserve as fellow service members. Judge people by their actions, their character, and their commitment to our shared values. Build the kind of military culture that brings out the best in everyone, regardless of their background or circumstances. The lesson concluded with a moment of silence for the careers that had been ended by failures of judgment and character, and a commitment from everyone present to do better in their own service. As the recruits dispersed to their next training activity, a young woman approached Marlowe with obvious nervousness but clear determination. Private Noelle Harlow had been observing quietly throughout the orientation, her sharp eyes taking in details that others missed. "Ma'am, I received a letter yesterday about a special assessment program. It mentioned your name as the program director." Marlowe smiled slightly, recognizing the intelligence and potential that had marked Noelle for special attention. "The Advanced Leadership Development Initiative. It's designed to identify and develop soldiers who show exceptional promise for challenging assignments." "What kind of assignments, ma'am?" "The kind where appearance and assumptions can be powerful tools, Private. Where the ability to see through surface presentations to underlying truths can mean the difference between mission success and failure." Noelle's eyes lit up with understanding and anticipation. "When do I start?" "You already have," Marlowe replied, handing her a sealed envelope that contained orders for specialized training that would prepare her for missions most soldiers never dreamed of. "Welcome to the program, Private. Try not to let anyone underestimate you." As Noelle walked away with her new orders, Marlowe reflected on the long journey from that day of harassment and humiliation to this moment of new beginnings and reformed systems. The price had been high, measured in destroyed careers and shattered assumptions, but the lessons learned would protect countless future service members from similar experiences. The military was stronger now, more professional, more inclusive, more aware of the dangers that came from judging people by their appearance rather than their character and capabilities. The changes implemented at Fort Blackstone were spreading throughout the entire training system, creating a culture where everyone could serve with dignity and respect. But perhaps most importantly, the story itself had become a powerful reminder that in military service, as in life, things are not always what they seem. The person you underestimate today might be the one evaluating your performance tomorrow. The individual you dismiss as weak or different might be exactly the leader your unit needs in its most challenging moments. In the end, that was the most valuable lesson of all. Respect everyone, assume nothing, and never forget that true strength sometimes comes disguised as vulnerability. The quiet person in the corner might be exactly who you need them to be if you're wise enough to look beyond the surface to the character and capability underneath. The reforms at Fort Blackstone continued, ensuring that no future soldier would have to endure what Major Marlowe Kincaid had experienced, and that the military would remain a place where everyone could serve with pride, dignity, and the respect they deserved.